Hello and welcome back to another episode. Last night I heard the sad news that the great maestro of comic books, Stan Lee, had passed away, aged 95. Yesterday was actually quite a busy day of work for me. I was lecturing at Newcastle University in the morning. In the afternoon I was filming an interview with a 98-year-old lady who was reflecting on her childhood and being an adult during the Second World War, working hard and playing hard, going to the dance hall, the Oxford Hall in Newcastle, and a remarkable career in the shipbuilding industry, actually. And then after that, I had to rush to South Shields, to the library, to help some young people research a BMX track that we're doing an archaeology project on. It's an overgrown BMX track that we're investigating as an archaeological monument. And so it was a busy day, a day when I had to be in certain places at certain times, a tight schedule. And so I didn't really have time to really listen to the radio, watch any TV, or read any newspapers. And so it wasn't until around 7:30, 8 o'clock, when I was reversing the car into the driveway, that I finally heard some news. A bulletin came on the radio, and I was just about to turn off the engine when I heard the top headline, and that was the news of Stan Lee's death. And so I listened to the full bulletin, and with a heavy heart, with a sigh, I turned off the radio, turned off the engine, came in to the house, and gave my wife a big hug. Since then, I've become aware that across the world, millions of voices are eulogizing and celebrating Stan Lee, thanking him for existing, for bringing into the world so much of what we now know as Marvel and Marvel Comics. And of course, the achievements of Stan Lee are inextricably linked with his colleagues, Jack Kirby, Steve Ditko, and others. And so it's hard to really separate what it is that he brought to Marvel out from those other people. But it's undeniable that he became a face and an energy and a persona of Marvel in such a special way over the past 40 years, really. I believe he made a cameo in the Hulk TV series in the 70s, I think, 70s or 80s. I remember him appearing in the animated Spider-Man show, the wonderful 90s cartoon.
I don't believe what you're telling me. In your reality, I'm a character in fiction? Yep, and I'm an actor who plays you on TV. But there's someone here I knew you had to meet. He's the man who created you for fans all over the world.
And I said to Jack, what if his skin turns green?
Excuse me. I'm looking for some guy named Stan Lee.
What? Spider-Man? Pam, hold my calls for a while. I think I've finally gone crazy.
And of course, in the movies, he became increasingly a face associated with Marvel, and that only grew with exposure to him through Comic-Con appearances and on YouTube. These appearances being made available to us all to see his stage persona. By all accounts, he was quite a humble, quiet man off stage, but on stage he had this, deliberately bravado-ish character, and that's what we all came to know and love. But today I want to add to those millions of voices by reflecting on how I first came across the name of Stan Lee. I didn't know who he was. I never thought I would know who he was. I never even thought I would know what he looked like. But I knew his name very early on. And actually through the very first Spider-Man comic that I owned. The Astonishing Spider-Man Collector's Edition, 7th of February 1996. This is a collection of Spider-Man comics from in the middle of the Clone saga. So not everyone's favourite Spider-Man storyline, but I loved the artwork. This was the book that really cemented Spider-Man in my life as probably my favourite comic book hero. He swaps places with Batman every now and then. The two of them vie for the top two position, but certainly my favourite Marvel hero, Spider-Man. Uh, and this is despite the fact that Spider-Man was going through a really dark time at this point. I mean, look at that cover there, that cover art with Spider-Man beating up the Scorpion in the sewer. Uh, he was magnetic. He was deeply important to me and remains so today. And it wasn't long before I noticed that at the top of these stories it said Stan Lee presents the Spectacular Spider-Man. Right at the beginning of the book, Stan Lee presents the Spectacular Spider-Man. And I very quickly realised that Stan Lee must be important. You know, I'd come across the name Bob Kane linked with Batman, although that's quite a long story in itself, who actually created Batman. And I assumed that Stan Lee and Bob Kane, maybe they're friends. Maybe these are just two people who just make up comic book characters. That sounds like a cool job. And it was, you know, over those weeks and months, especially in the mid-90s, picking up the occasional comic when it did make its way to Prestatyn in North Wales, that I would see Stan Lee's name. So there we go again. Stan Lee presents A Tale of Tragedy and Triumph, Siege. It just became this name that I just knew was going to be at the beginning of there you go, Stan Lee presents Legacy. That it was going to be at the beginning of all these comics. So as a child, I really didn't know who Stan Lee was. I certainly didn't know what he looked like. But I used to imagine, though, that he must live in some sort of tower in New York to be bringing me all these tales of Spider-Man swinging around New York City. I remember this issue where Spider-Man's getting trapped in all this goop. So it's like Webbing versus Goop Man, I guess. Can't quite remember what the name of the villain is. But again, right at the beginning of the story, we have Stan Lee presents A Matter of Respect. The artwork would change subtly from issue to issue, but the name Stan Lee would remain. November 1996, The Amazing Spider-Man, and Stan Lee presents The Amazing Spider-Man in Secrets. That was it. Everything you know is wrong. This is a well-loved issue of Spider-Man. You can see the comic cover is a little bit delicate, but he was there. He was my comic spirit guide. He was the maestro. And this issue in particular is very special to me. Heroes Farewell, October 1996. This is an issue where Spider-Man is dealing with the aftermath of a huge battle where the Avengers and the Fantastic Four, it seems, have perished, and he's having to explain to a young boy why that happened and how they can move on with the memories of these heroes with them. In that sense, looking back, it felt a lot like the effect of 9/11, but obviously in a comic book world in 1996. I doubt they could have imagined that 9/11 was on the horizon when they wrote this. But Stan Lee presents The Amazing Spider-Man, The Road Back. And here he was, a name bringing me these tall buildings, these tales of New York City, of action and adventure, on a scale that, frankly, film and television just couldn't provide when I was a kid. You know, they were trying, but they were failing. I mean, look at that backflip. Look at the way that Spider-Man's webbing is shooting in two different directions here, and how his eyes are coming up into the frame. He just looks so cool. And I really vividly remember there's one panel in this. I remember drawing over and over again in school exercise books. And it's Spider-Man almost sort of parkouring. Parkour before parkour was really a thing. But here we are with Spider-Man vaulting over a chimney stack on a rooftop twisting his body gracefully, moving through the city. And this particular image just was so interesting to me as a child. And frankly, today, it's still just part of my psyche. Incidentally, I love this particular Spider-Man costume. I've always loved it. It's Ben Reilly. It's still, I think, in the aftermath of the Clone Saga, and part of that story. But I've always liked it with the web shooters on the outside of the costume, 2 red fingers, 2 blue fingers on his hands, and a red thumb. I've always loved that. But with each issue, each episode in these ongoing adventures, Stan Lee's name was always there. He was the master of ceremonies, welcoming me into the circus tent. Come on in, child, you won't believe your eyes. And I'm so grateful for that. And that is how I first met Stan Lee. That is how I first came to know his name. So, thank you, Stan Lee. A generous soul, a wonderful human, a creative titan, and a name intimately and inextricably linked with one of my favourite characters on this planet. Rest in peace.